Welcome to the next podcast from Millinery.Info. This episode is with Justin Smith, the milliner and creative behind J Smith Esquire. You may recognise pieces from his collection that are made in his London-based studio, but also his work of the iconic headpiece worn by Angelina Jolie in Maleficent. We hope you enjoy hearing part of Justin's story in this episode today. This was made possible thank you to the support of our wonderful podcast sponsors. These include Hatters Millinery Supplies, the Millinery Association of Australia, Katherine Cherry Millinery, Hat Academy, The Essential Hat, Hat Atelier, Louise McDonald Milliner, That Millinery, and we'd like to welcome House of Adorn as a new podcast sponsor. Thank you so much to all of these businesses for their support. You can find a link to each of their websites in our show notes, which is on your podcast app or on our website. We'd love to invite you to become a sponsor of this podcast series. Everyone is welcome, and it's a great way you can show your support if you're interested and able. You can head to www.patreon.com/Millinery.Info, or there is a link on our website. If you have any questions about being a sponsor, just send us through a message and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much, Justin, for joining me today to talk hats. You're in your London studio today, and a question I always like to start with is, how did you become involved with millinery?
That's a big question. I actually started life as a hairdresser. So I started hairdressing at about the age of 17, went through lots of my study, came to London, and then I was always super interested in doing avant-garde hairdressing. So I was kind of creating sculptural works out of hair, essentially. So I joined a company called Toni & Guy, which, do a lot of big shows around the world, and managed to kind of become head of their avant-garde quite quickly in my career. So then I started to just do big shows, mostly working with Sasha Muscolo, who mostly runs Toni & Guy, and just doing really crazy sculptural hair stuff. Really, I mean, I was working in the salon as well, so I was obviously building my skills. I was teaching, colouring, cutting, all the rest of it. But then the avant-garde work was really my passion. And then as I was developing, I suppose over the first 5 years of doing that avant-garde work, I'd become a finalist for lots of hair awards, all this kind of stuff. I felt like the medium was a bit limiting, I suppose. So I'd learned a bit about buckram because a few people had told me about weird things that I could start to use as foundations for the hair work. And then through that, I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe I should go on a millinery course to learn a little bit more about balance and weight in proportion to push my avant-garde work more. And in that process, I went on a beginner's course and made my first bowler hat. And the rest is history, basically. I'd been with Toni & Guy about 6, nearly 7 years. I was kind of wanting to get out of a big institution and go on my own in terms of hairdressing and set up my own salon. So then I did a millinery course in my final year with them. And then after that first millinery course, I set up my own salon, and then that gave me the ability to have more autonomy with my time. I wasn't doing the big shows anymore with Toni & Guy. I wasn't traveling the world and doing like collections based on a seasonal thing to do with the shows that they did, which was a lot every year. They did different ones in America and the UK, etc. They traveled around. So then the third beginner's course, then an intermediate course, then an advanced course, and then a Kensington and Chelsea, a HNC course of 3 days a week. And then I heard about the Royal College of Art. And 7 years later, I'd studied loads of millinery alongside running the hair salon, and started to make a few bespoke commissions for people. But because I was also in that photographic world of making pieces to put in photos and, advertising, that kind of stuff, a few people borrowed some of my work for magazines, and that started a whole ream of stuff, really, because then magazines borrowed my work. I came out of the Royal College. I ended up starting a brand, and it kind of spiraled through, like most milliners, an obsession to make hats, essentially.
And when you went in, did you always have the ambition or the prospect that you might start your own millinery studio and brand out of that? Or did you have a vision of what that might turn into?
I think so. Yeah, I always wanted to have my own salon in hairdressing, and I've always wanted like my own autonomy, and always been a bit stubborn in terms of like what I wanted to do. So when I was with Tony and Guy, I always wanted to do my own collections. I showed with them. I was teaching a lot of the stuff that I was developing myself. So it was always kind of quite a headstrong approach to things. And then just the millinery spiral then came out of the Royal College, and it seemed like a really natural progression for me after running my own salon anyway, to then start doing a lot of the millinery off my own back. And I got a free place at London Fashion Week. So that was kind of a little bit like, just seemed really natural. I mean, you know, it just seemed very natural to just start carrying on doing my own thing. And really the hairdressing, all the exhibition work, and I still do avant-garde work, and it still influences my brand very much to this day. So that was always like something that I carried on doing. I had my client list, I had my salon to run. So actually the millinery could take an organic, you know, growth pattern alongside actually like, you know, making the business work essentially. So yes, that seems supernatural. And I've always kind of, it just felt right, I suppose.
When you're designing either work for your avant-garde hair work or your millinery, do you find the two are influencing each other, or it's a little bit of a silo design experience for you?
No, they totally influence each other. I mean, in the hairdressing, I was always interested in vintage, and I always looked at like very old Hollywood, and you know, all my hairdressing was inspired by a lot of film and theatre anyway. So then, I suppose as I started to do millinery, I wanted to start making things that look like hairstyles, and lots of traditional hats, like top hats, but like trying to push the boundaries of what does a top hat look like from which era, and then how do we modernize that a little bit. So it's completely like, it's just a soup for me of many different things. You know, when I started doing my label, everyone was like, well, you've come out of women's wear, so you must be women's wear. And I'm like, I don't get that. And I've never seen that. And I've always been pretty adamant to stick to that I don't photograph anything, any of my collections on generally a masculine or a feminine head or model of any description. When I do photo shoots, a lot of the time the men end up wearing the women's hats, and it all ends up being, like I said, a soup of different things anyway. So yeah, so it's always been just like kind of, you know, different inventions and different ideas based on what I love about headwear and what I love about style and personal style, and then let whoever finds them take them and do what they will with them, you know. So I like that, to have, you know, make a little object like a little sculpture, but then not really dictate its future. You know, I think that each hat has a little, like, if each hat wrote a diary for itself, it would be kind of amazing what it did, because a lot of the time you do it for a photo shoot, it ends up on a model's head, and then you might sell it to somebody, and then it travels the world, or then it sometimes goes out to photo shoots, so it's been traveling the world without me, going to different places. So it's always like got a different, each object that you make seems to have a different trajectory based on who kind of likes it and who picks up on it, essentially. And that's what I really like about each collection. And that also informs the next design and the next approach, you know. So yeah.
So I was going to ask you about your collections, because on your website you have some of your collections listed, and I noticed they're labeled more not to an autumn winter year, but a more of a title of the collection. I wondered if you could maybe share a little bit about that, and maybe why you chose that approach as opposed to I guess a particular label of a season or year.
Yeah, I think like following on from what I just said, I don't really see my collections fitting into like autumn, winter or spring, summer. I don't particularly serve a particular kind of client that kind of like goes to special events at one time of the year and not others. It's always been making objects that people will cherish and love and have in their wardrobe forever. And ideally like that will develop and change with them, but it's a staple piece within their wardrobe. So I guess my collections were always inspired by themes or ideas or obsessions that I had at the time. And then that drove the experimentation within the fabrics themselves to let the kind of like collection kind of find its own way. So one was called Illuminated, so it was all transparent silks, you know, and some of it was masks and some of it was flowers, and it was all very much based on, you know, an illumination of flowers, I suppose. Have other collections called Black, which was all photographed black on black, and it was really trying to strip everything back down to what is my brand after 10 years of doing it, and what is my silhouette, and what do people see my brand as, I suppose, that's unique. So each collection really just has its own entity, and then I think it sits in that world. So for the first 7 years I was showing at Fashion Week, and it was very much like an autumn, winter, spring, summer, whatever. I had to fit into that kind of category because that's where I was effectively exhibiting my work. But most of my stockists always bought my collections based on pieces, not based on, you know, that they would sell it maybe in the next month or two, but really that they would become part of their collection or become part of a mood that they were creating. Or sometimes I reference this collection I did before, but then I'll do it again the following season, but it'll be in a different fabric or a different mood. So it's a continuous development of technique and ideas based on, you know, my passion essentially, which leads it all forward, rather than feeling that it has to kind of serve a particular kind of environment, I suppose. I make a lot of straw hats for winter for people, for example, which is kind of, you know, unusual, but I make straw top hats with linings and, you know, kind of mix it up. And I think that flavor in somebody's wardrobe is really important, to actually be able to offer something unique and different and a bit inspiring, rather than following a kind of formula of what we need to stick to.
And over those at least 10 years you've been working on these collections, has the way you've approached that changed very much?
Yeah, definitely. I think in the beginning it was a lot based on PR and what people were telling me to do and what people were expecting to see from me, including being very inventive. And then over the time, I guess that I've found my own voice and been more headstrong about what I wanted to say. And actually, like, as after 7 years of showing on the fashion industry, I felt like I wanted to move and change away from that environment. So then I started to go and do my own collections based on every year or two or three. I mean, I think there was 3 years in between the Black collection and the Gold collection, which are the two most recent that I've done. And now I treat it more like kind of art collections, I suppose. So then I showed in an art gallery, and a lot of the pieces from the Gold collection, which was after 12 years of having a brand, were inspired by everything that I had learned and trying to extend and grow, but also a culmination of like 2 or 3 years of collecting fabrics where I kind of go, oh, that's nice, or oh, that's lovely, or oh, I love this shape, and people seem to respond to it well, it looks really good on everybody, but wouldn't it be nice in X? So it's always a development of like technique and inspiration that leads to like trying to always make it, you know, more grow in a way and have more solid shapes. And I guess when I've stopped the fashion industry because I wasn't working on that cycle of autumn, winter, spring, summer, I've had a lot more focus on like, what is the J Smith Esquire identity? What do I bring to the table? What hats have I got in my wardrobe that I love? Because every collection, if I find something that I really love that looks good on me, it stays in my wardrobe. And that was actually a starting point for like kind of developing my brand to be really more truly me than what I was doing in the beginning, which was based around PR and trying to grow my business and grow my brand. And, you know, of course, when you first start, you're experimenting. You want people to notice what you're doing. You make a lot of things that people ask you to make that push you into a different direction, or stockists ask you to do different colorways, which you would never experiment with, and suddenly you like it. So it's always, you know, a development of that. And then I guess that, yeah, you just, as you grow up as a brand, you develop and grow that with your style more. And for me, it's my brand has always been a case of like, I don't want a brand, I don't want to be like globally recognized and super famous. It's all more about, I want to have autonomy on what I want to do and say. So then that has also become stronger as I've become more developed as a designer, I guess.
So between those collections you mentioned, there was a 3-year gap, but during that time you're obviously still producing hats and pieces. During that time, are your customers coming in to purchase, do they purchase things they've seen on your website and they go, I want that particular hat? Or are they coming in going, I've seen this, but I kind of want it like this, or I want something completely different? What's that process like?
Well, now I work bespoke, so most of the pieces end up becoming like pieces that stay in my personal collection. I maybe sell about 40 to 50% of them over time when they find the head that suits them. And then the rest of them become like models that actually people will come in and try on, but they kind of go, I love this, but it won't go with my blue suit because it's not the right color, or, because they're staple pieces that will last in people's wardrobe forever. And I have a real kind of like focus on being a hairdresser. So you can't cut somebody's fringe in if it doesn't suit their hair type or doesn't look good on their face. So that's really my approach to millinery, is that you can buy stuff off the shelf and it might look fine. And I think for certain types of millinery that works incredibly well. But for my type of millinery, it's more bespoke, it's more personal. It needs to be curated around the wearer and also what they're wearing. So the hat doesn't necessarily wear them, but it's part of a combination of things that beautify and bring the elegance. So now it's really a case of a lot of the pieces are used as a reference and then sold bespoke. And then, like I said, if somebody comes in and tries it on and take it out the window and they absolutely love it, well, then I'll sell it to them as a unique piece. And some people love that and they want it as a unique piece that nobody else will have. And other people are quite happy for me to remake it in their size, or I work really quite truly bespoke. So I take head measurements and wire shapes of exactly the skull that I'm working from. So that for me is super important, and that needs to kind of harmonize with whoever's buying the pieces. And I guess when I was doing the fashion industry as well, it was quite a lot of the time people would say to me, I really like this collection, but can you do it in silver or can you do it in this? So I ended up doing exclusive ranges for shops anyway, because that was my price point. They wanted something exclusive, and actually I make everything by hand. I don't make anything in a factory where it's going to be a number that then they have to order from stock. So actually then it taught me how to behave more bespoke with all of my clients, whether that be working with a shop or anybody that comes into my shop as a personal client. And then that, I suppose, has found its feet. And now I do a lot more personal client work, whether that be through film or celebrities or people that come into my shop, than I do work on bespoke collections for shops to sell through to another source. I go more direct to the end where people are wearing them.
So we are speaking during COVID lockdowns at the moment, so I understand some of this is a bit unusual, but I guess looking back and hopefully looking forward to the future at one point, do most of your customers come into your store, or do you have people who you're doing remotely and digitally sending them, or they'll just place an order and you ship it to them? What's your exchange like with your customer?
Yeah, I mean, I can totally work remotely, and then if they usually send me a head size, I can make it to fit them pretty good. If it's like a high-end client or quite a specific job, then I actually make a wire head shape up, and then I'll educate the client, send that to them in the post, educate them on actually fitting it. If it was like a turban, for instance, I'll make the base of the turban, send it to them in the post, they'll put it on, take photos of themselves, or we'll get on Skype or Zoom or whatever. And then I can see how that fits, and then I can work, and remotely relatively well, not as good as if it's bespoke, because of course with your hands on somebody, and head shapes are really important to me to get the silhouette of things right. But it is totally possible to still do bespoke on a remote level. And for a lot of my film work, a lot of the A-listers are all kind of like in their houses in the middle of Scotland, or, like they're somewhere else that you can't get to, or their schedule is such that you can see them the day before when they start filming, but you don't get much time, 24 hours to fit, to actually make that thing a reality. So then I always try and push to get that fitting underway more remotely quickly. So then even if that turban base is put on top of them and I can see their eyebrows and you can't see their eyes because it's way too big, then at least you've got a guide as to how the bespoke is going to work. So and I think my hairdressing background gives me a very good lead and steer on all that kind of thing, because I have 20 plus years experience in actually like doing hair on people's heads. So the fitting and the you know, the curation of that piece around somebody's head is like I said to me, like a haircut, which is really key to my work actually being successful and looking the best that it possibly can. So in the last few months I've made pieces remotely, and we've done exactly what I've described, but more, you know, more often than not I try and get people to come to the shop and have a proper fitting, or I go and visit them.
So you have a shop front. What's the setup like? You have a showroom? Do you have your studio space there as well where you produce, or what's the layout?
It's the whole, it encompasses everything, because it came from being a salon before, and then that salon, the waiting room got turned into a millinery studio, and all my clients kind of sat in the millinery studio while waiting for a haircut. It's kind of gradually just translated into that. So now I have a window space where I have all like exhibiting my work, and then moving backwards a little bit from that, there's kind of a fitting chair, and then lots of pieces that are in process. So a big wall of stuff that's like half made, so people can really engage with the true bespoke nature of it. And then the main body of the shop is like my desk and machines and the real kit. It's a very long straight shop, so you can see from front to back, so you can see all of it from the window, which I love, because people see me cutting cloth and really getting my hands in there, you know. And then at the back of the shop there is like another fitting mirror with like mirrors all the way around, so you can see every single angle of yourself, and that's where I'm also hairdressing, which I continue to do and see a lot of my regular clients even now. So that's an important aspect of it. So it's like, you know, it encompasses everything essentially, and that changes as I develop, or with every big job I do, a piece of furniture gets moved, and you know, it's kind of part of telling the story. I can't help myself, or someone will give me a glass cabinet that suddenly ends up being part of my shop, and that becomes part of the display. And you know, it's not a fixed identity that has to say a certain thing. It's really, again, a creative space where people kind of go and get bombarded by so much visual stuff, like parrots on top of cupboards and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's a kind of exhibition space, creative space, development space, as much as it is a shop. Yeah. And I don't expect to have walk-ins. I work by appointment only. And then that way, then I liaise with that client before they come, when they come to the shop. I've always worked like this anyway, but now with the COVID situation, it seems to be even more kind of poignant somehow. But then when that client comes, I've got a lot of the table full of all the things that they kind of want to try on. So maybe they're looking for a straw hat that looks a bit like a trilby. So then I'll kind of like dig out some bits from my archive, take some bits out the window. So then you get a proper kind of fitting and a proper kind of service with actually that, you know, touch on that person's head. And inevitably what they decide they like in the window won't be what they actually want to see on their head, because it's, you know, working with their face shape. So then you have to take the essence of what they've fallen in love with out the window, and then show them other pieces to explain how I work, and the sense of quality between, you know, different straws, for instance. And then that starts a dialogue into the bespoke, and then it goes from there. They usually come back for a second fitting, possibly even a third. And you mentioned in there about some film work, and you created the headpiece for Angelina Jolie for Maleficent. Is that correct? Yeah. I'd love to hear about that process. How did that come about? What was it like creating the piece? Could you share with us a little bit about that? So the Maleficent headdress was just amazing. I guess it was, one of my friends was working in film, and I'd been looking to get into film for a long time, TV film. It was one of those things that I was trying to get in from the beginning, and slowly you do little bits and bobs, and then they see more of your work, and my website was building more and more. So then I had like a very big archive on my website, and then Angelina came across my work, and they had several other milliners have a go at making the Maleficent headdress, and she wanted to develop it further. So she found me and called me in for a meeting, and that's kind of where it started. We hit it off, and we hit it off really well. So then I started to do things over the first course of a week, make some samples for her, and then she's really heavily involved in like her identity and her approach, and she loves the creative approach to it all. So she loves the way I work with like working around the head shape and trying to adorn the head to make it better. So then we just developed developed it right from the very beginning. The first piece was done in like something insane, like 48 hours. So that was a little bit like baptism of fire.
Yes.
But then once we got off the ground with like kind of figuring out exactly what silhouette we were going to give her and what materials we were going to work in, then it was a case of creating an identity and then trying to push that identity to new realms. So, you know, the first one, like I said, was a baptism of fire, and then we kind of like developed it quite a bit and really got this kind of animalistic approach using different kinds of skins and things like that. And then Maleficent 2 was a development on the first one, so I pulled out everything from my archive that I had from the first one, and just kept developing it and trying to do new things in new ways and to try and, you know, push the character. And like I said, she developed, she's very involved in that process. So with every final piece that you end up with, there might have been 7 or 8 pieces that are almost come to completion before she chooses the final one that she wants. Yeah. So, and that is obviously in conjunction with the costume designer and how the costume takes shape. And maybe she's got like, you know, a cape going in the first bit and it suddenly turns into a skirt. So then you have to kind of change the silhouette a little bit of what you're doing. So yeah, that's kind of how it worked. And it was quite, I'd done quite a few different movies before that point, but that was really the biggest, most iconic thing that I had done to that date. And then that really kind of like got me into the film world in a big way. And now I work with quite a lot of costume designers, trying to come up with, you know, new and interesting characters and also give kind of iconic looks. And I think that's kind of one of the 6 key points to my brand, I suppose, is that, you know, coming from the hairdressing perspective and working, trying to be as inventive as possible and not be seasonal as possible. It's always trying to kind of find that thing that will make something kind of iconic and give it a real flavor, but then also not give it something that necessarily feels totally vintage or totally like exactly what it was before, but a development and a modernization of to push it to the next level. So, and Angelina's fantastic in terms of seeing that. She knows what she wants and she kind of like, you know, will continue to push her team around her to get to that level where she really sees that character and then she can embody that character in her approach to her acting.
You made some pieces for Dolittle. What was that process like? And what pieces, how many did you create for that production?
Oh, so Dr. Dolittle was fun. You know, it's like a really cute story. I remember growing up watching the movies. So, you know, for me, that was like a really exciting one to be involved with. I work with Jenny Bevan, who's the costume designer who won the Oscar from Mad Max. And I've been working with her on quite a few films. Lovely lady, really lovely lady. I actually do her hair as well. So it's really nice to have like, you know, like personal contact with her. And that's actually how I met her before I started working with her in millinery. Somebody that I worked with in film knew her and she was saying that she's got really curly hair and can't find a hairdresser to cut it. And I was recommended and suddenly I ended up, you know, meeting her. And then, Dolittle, we worked together and it was really nice to do menswear for film. You know, It was really nice to work on a lead character that actually, like, you know, has a bit of a style, but then you want to try and push that personality to, you know, a kind of a slightly new or inventive level, but of course still sit within the remit of who this character really is. So when Jenny came, I showed her some of my work, my previous collections before, and she really loved the asymmetrical top hat that I did in my black collection, which is essentially kind of a top hat, but it's got like a wonky brim on it, leather underneath the brim, polished kind of like fur felt top. Super nice, super classic, but kind of like a bit odd. And she loved that hat. So that was the first point of where she started, because she could show the director the example from my collection. This is something already to kind of like a starting point to start forming the character. So then that piece we've remade, but in a brown. So that was really the first piece we made. And then usually make 2 or 3 of each piece. So I think I made about 3 of those. And then I believe we did 3 different other styles. The other one that's really notable was a straw top hat that was really lovely, very tall, slightly taller than normal. really nice straw, like a strip straw, but then also I was working with the breakdown department who kind of paint and age everything. And got a lot of friends in breakdown, and when somebody took that hat, a friend of mine, Greer, and actually painted it and hand painted exactly, each of the straw bits to make it really look aged and really make it look super characterful. So that one for me was probably my favorite, because although the asymmetrical top hat is kind of iconic and it was on the poster and it was part of something from my collection, so that's always really nice when that happens. The straw top hat was really beautiful because I make this object, it's really gorgeous, it leaves my studio like, oh, it's a nice fancy new top hat, and then I suddenly see it coming back from my friend Greer, and it's like, oh my god, like it looks like a different piece. It's like turning it into an art piece, so each one is like hand painted and got, it brings like an essence to my work that I love about working in film, full stop, is that I love doing what I do and I love my discipline, but it's not always about what I do, it's about I am a tool in the toolkit, and everybody together makes that whole thing really shine and make it turn into what it is. So by collaborating with other people on every film, it really brings a whole new essence to the pieces that I make and pushes them in a different direction than I would have necessarily taken them myself. So it was nice to see that straw top hat done like that, and she had spent a lot of time painting it, and it's it's really, I really love and appreciate that, and everybody else's different discipline and how obsessed they are about their discipline like I am with mine, and that collective energy really creates what it is in film or TV or on screen. And that, I think that's, I enjoy that a lot.
Yeah. And so you mentioned you make multiples sometimes of pieces. How do you manage that in terms of material? Like, is that always possible? Are there limitations to that? And how do you manage that process of making sure that you get 3 or 4 that look identical?
Yeah, I mean, with those top hats, it was kind of easy-ish, because a lot of the time they were made of materials that you can readily get. They weren't vintage materials. And then actually the breakdown department is their challenge to actually make all 3 of them or all 4 of them hand-painted in exactly the same way to make them look the same. Or maybe one of them ends up in water and then it needs to be, something different needs to be done to it, So the continuity comes a lot of the time from the breakdown as much as it does from the actual finished piece. It's relatively straightforward, because I've been working in fashion and doing production. You can kind of make 1 or 2 or 3 of similar things, and it gets complicated when you've done something and you've just made it super creative, and then you kind of have to look at it and go, oh, I don't even remember how I made it, and then you've got to make 2 more of them. But I've become a bit of a wizard at, like, somebody can give me a photo of something, whether it be a vintage hat that their dad used to own or something that was in a film before, and I can pretty much replicate it to the button, even with the size and texture. So yeah, generally that it's perfectly fine. If we work with like vintage materials, and a lot of the time we do in film, because you want something unique and has to have a certain texture and identity, then actually we'll only go into those vintage fabrics if we know we've got enough to start with, generally. And it does depend a lot on the film too, because some people they usually say 1 is none. So you need a minimum of 2 in case something happens to 1, right? But actually some costume designers are less strict about that than others. Some like 2 or 3, and it's a big Disney movie, so they'll end up in museums or they'll end up in exhibitions. So it's very important to have a few examples of that thing to create that costume in a few different areas. And then other people know that they've only got 1 scene, they're filming for 1 day, and it might be something like that they're not even doing very much in, and then they're quite happy to just have the 1, because if you've only got a tiny bit of vintage fabric and it's super unique, that brings more to the table than having to replicate it. So if we ever need to replicate it, we can kind of have fabric made or something that looks similar for an exhibition, so it's it's relatively the same, if that is necessary for the future of the movie. So,
and you've also made pieces for Star Wars: The Last Jedi. How do these experiences differ? Are there similarities between them, or they just can be vastly different depending on, I guess, the team and the designer?
Oh yeah, it's very different. Like with Jenny, I've worked on quite a few films now, and actually I just finished working on one doing Cruella with her. So that was like really nice because you work with a similar team. They have a similar process. You know, every designer has their process, the way they like to work. Some people love a whole table full of stuff and they need to see it. Other people give you a drawing and know exactly what they want. So with Star Wars, I was working with Michael Kaplan, and he's got a very keen eye. He knows exactly what he wants. His drawings are fantastic. He'll have a really brilliant research and development room. It's all referenced off Star Wars that come before as well. So there's, of course, that element to it. And then it's a kind of collaboration in a way. But certainly with Star Wars, he was very much like, show me what you can do and what you imagine, which was just fantastic because it's really a totally different brief than working with something like Doolittle, where he's definitely wearing a hat, you know, and a top hat, and it needs to have a silhouette to it. Star Wars, it was like, what can you come up with and how fantastical can you be? We're creating a world that essentially they fly into, and it's a black and white world on a different planet where everybody's got loads of money. So it was like, okay, how opulent and ridiculous can we make this, you know? So they had big room with lots of fabrics to play with that a lot of the outfits were coming from anyway. So I would see what dresses were made or what suits were made, and then go off and kind of have a play and trying to push my millinery skills and techniques into that world of creating fantastical kind of shapes and ideas. And we were doing, that was really nice because it was a whole crowd scene. So a lot of the time in film, I work with a principal actor or one or two principal actors. So it's a little bit more specific. You have to work with that actor sometimes or work with the costume designer, but it's very focused. With Star Wars, it was kind of, I was doing a lot for the principals as well, but ultimately the main scene that I was there for was the black and white scene, and we needed about 100 hats. So it was just a case of like, rah, let's just make loads of different things. And essentially it was more about styling on the day of what went with what. And then when we saw stuff that we really liked, maybe we would make a version bigger for a different character, or, you know, it kind of unfolded over a period of months. I was working at Pinewood for about 4 months on that job, I think. So that was, you know, it was fantastic, and fantastic to get that kind of brief of just show me how crazy and ridiculous you can make it with this remit, you know, with these fabrics and with this kind of identity that you're trying to create. So it was very nice to also make everything black or white, or a combination. Yeah, it was really fun. And actually I worked with Michael on set as well on the day to actually style everybody. So everybody was kind of running around just making sure that the hats were fitted on the dresses properly, everyone was wearing them correctly, you know, because they go off and they get put on heads by the hair team, and there was about 200 people plus at least on set. So, you know, you need to go on set right just before the camera shoots and make sure that everything's kind of positioned right. And sometimes the thing in the front of the camera will be something that you don't expect because you don't quite know where the cameras are coming from on the day. So, you know, it's all about kind of changing that a little bit, making sure that it works with each shot, really. So, yeah, it was a really fun job, and amazing to work on something like Star Wars. I also needed to make some of the super iconic kind of military hats as well for some of the lead actors. So that was really nice because I was taking something that everybody knows of the actual iconic kind of military shapes, but then actually trying to make that a completely bespoke item made out of the same fabric for the principal. So that was really nice because then that's turning my hand to taking that photo and that style that's been made already, that's been in all the films, and then actually turn that into a bespoke item to make sure it fits and suits that principal character's face really well. So that's a really nice completely different angle, because one minute I'm making kind of whatever I fantasize in my head, and the more crazy and inventive the better, really. And then on the other side, it's all about my bespoke skills and how to really curate something that already has an identity but make it look right for that person's face. And that's a very enjoyable part of my millinery that I really, really like, that really true bespoke aspect to it. So
yeah. And with these theatrical projects, are they something that you're able to do within your workroom, or do you go into their workspaces to complete that?
With just depends. Again, with Star Wars and with Maleficent, I've worked at Pinewood on set with either the costume designer, because I'm working very closely with them and I'm doing a lot of pieces, so we have to kind of work very focused for a period of time. Or with Maleficent, the same thing, working very closely with Angelina in conjunction with her and the costume designer, but I need to be on set all the time. I'm fitting it all the time. And then with Dr. Dolittle and Cruella, Jenny Bevan comes to the studio, do a bit of a show and tell of everything that I've done before. She maybe says that she's looking for something, a particular type of hat, and then I'll pull out lots of pieces from my archive for when she comes. So then that starts our inspiration off, and then I pretty much make everything from my studio and then just go into the set for fittings. So yeah, it really just depends on the kind of team that you're working with and how they like to work, really. Some people keep their workroom quite small and keep the fittings really tiny to kind of like have more control and keep it kind of a bit easier for the actual principal. And other times it's just, you know, a big soup of just everybody going for it, because there's a lot to do in a short period of time, and it's easier to be you know, there on set. So yeah.
And how do you manage that time so that takes you away from your studio and your other pieces? How do you find how do you manage that and balance those commitments out?
I kind of like all those aspects. I love going to do fittings. I love the true bespoke. I like people coming to the shop because it's fun. Of course, everybody gets to come into my world, and it's full of crazy objects and inspiration. And then I really love going on set. I love seeing, you know, it's such an amazing experience, and it's such a blessing to be able to be involved with these things. Going on set on Star Wars, you know, and working and made a headdress for Carrie Fisher on Star Wars, you know, and to see her laying down wearing this headdress, or then the next minute it looked like she was laying in a box, but actually it was a rubber version of her. That we're then putting a hat on, and this rubber version basically really lifelike, unbelievable. Even her head had weight, so somebody was lifting up her head while I was putting the headdress on. So, you know, and there's just amazing aspects to my work, that you get to do so many different things. That's really fun, and of course that's nice and energizing. And you know, I don't mind at all the work taking me out of my studio. It gets complicated when you have to go and work at Pinewood for 2 or 3 months. Of course, you take your entire studio with you, so it's like constantly a moving process of kit. You know, you have to be quite on the ball in terms of always having what you need. But I think that's my Cub Scout mentality always coming in. I hardly ever forget anything. I've always got tools in my pockets, and you know, there's always being prepared for as many situations as possible.
Do you have a sneak peek of what we can look forward to seeing some of your pieces in soon?
Well, yeah, mentioning Cruella, that's all coming out soon, so that'll be really fun to see. And I think that's going to be really should be exciting and kind of amazing costume wise. I think Jenny Bevan was doing it again, so yeah, so that'll be really exciting. And then I've been working a little bit on a TV program as well called Bridgerton, which comes out soon, and that's like a TV series set in the 1800s. With a costume designer called Ellen Moroznik, and I worked with her on the second Maleficent. So she also did The Greatest Showman, is something you probably know her for the costume for as well. So she's a wonderful, really wonderful lady, really fabulous to work with her. She's got a really keen eye. She loves being shown things, and you can show her new and interesting things, and you know, she'll kind of go, that's amazing, but make it completely transparent. You're like, oh no, okay, good. So it's always like kind of pushing, you know, the boundaries and trying to and see what can come next. And it's a dialogue of creativity as well. So that's, you know, that'll be exciting to see. So that's a couple that are coming out.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for them, and we'll look forward to seeing some of your pieces. Thank you so much for chatting hats with me, Justin. It's been lovely to speak with you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today for this episode with Justin. We hope you enjoyed hearing about his story. We'd like to thank our Patreon podcast sponsors: Hatters Millinery Supplies, the Millinery Association of Australia, Katherine Millinery, Hat Academy, The Essential Hat, Hat Atelier, Louise McDonald Milliner, That Millinery, and House of Adorn. You can find a link to each of their businesses in our show notes. Would you like to become a sponsor of this series? We'd love to have you. It starts from just $15 a month and is run through a platform called Patreon. As part of your sponsorship, you'll receive a thank you in the monthly podcast, just like that, a link to your business on our website, and in our newsletter. We hope you've been enjoying this series. If you're a new listener, we hope you get a chance to scroll back through the episodes and enjoy the full series and find your favourites. If you're a long-time listener, thank you so much for your support. It's really appreciated. We hope that you might send on your favourite podcast to a fellow millinery friend. It's a great way to connect and keep each other company in the workroom when it might not be possible to be there ourselves. Remember, you can subscribe to our email list or to Millinery.Info in your podcast app so you don't miss when the next episode's released. We hope you've enjoyed this episode with Justin and look forward to speaking with you soon.